Hello, everyone. It's Paula Edgar, President of the Metropolitan Black Bar Association. We're here today for MBBA Learns webinar, Clearing the Air on Cannabis Law. So happy 420 to all of you. Let's learn a little bit more about that in a bit. Before we get started with our webinar, which I'm very excited for and actually was in response to many of our members' requests on this topic, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I have been the president of the MBBA for the last 2 years. My term will end on July 1. In addition to the work that I do and volunteer-wise with the organization, I am a diversity consultant and speaker, and I also do executive coaching. My contact information is on the screen, and it's also all over MBBA's website. So the vision that we had for this year was to have impact. And the detailing of what impact means for us is innovation, mentoring, partnership, advocacy, connecting with our community, and making sure we have training such as this one about areas in which there's an interest and that will advance and help our membership. Speaking of membership, if you are not a member of the MBBA, we encourage you to become one and to do it soon. There's a lot of great things that are happening with the organization, and we need your support and your membership to continue those. Before I move on, I'll let you know that we have an upcoming event, which is going to be on the 28th of this month, called I Am a Solution, which is one of our community justice and community engagement initiatives, which this I'm a Solution is going to be focused on gender equity and #MeToo, and it will be done in conjunction with a community law day. So some of our members will be there to provide legal services or free legal services or support to the community. So we encourage you to come for all or part of the day. It should be really great. We're releasing the speaker list shortly, and there are some high-level folks who will be talking about the impact of gender equity and sexual harassment on our community and what we can do about it. And then our favorite events of the year. On the 17th of May, we will have the 3rd Annual National Bar Association General Counsel Invitational, and that event is for General Counsel, in-house counsel. And the next day, we are having our annual gala. It's our 34th anniversary, where our theme is impacting our profession, impacting our community. And we'll be following that with an after party, which is Wakanda themed. And we'll have a good time. It's in the same place, and we'll have a great time. So if you are a public interest attorney and you have not bought your ticket yet, please know that the tickets for public interest attorneys that are discounted will stop being on sale as of midnight tonight, no exceptions. So get your ticket now, and no matter who you are, get your ticket now. We look forward to seeing you there. There's usually over 600 attorneys of color in the space enjoying and celebrating who we are. And this year's honoree listings are all women honorees, and we're excited about that. So now, we have an exciting speaker who will be talking about cannabis law and her knowledge and also the impact she's having in this space and what impact we can have as attorneys of color in this space. So I'd like to invite all of you to connect with Scheril Murray Powell, Esquire, who will be leading the webinar. Before I do that, you should know that on your webinar dashboard, there's an opportunity for you to ask questions using the Questions tab. I will read the questions to Cheryl and let her know them, but in the end, we'll be reserving time. So if you have questions at any point, do use the dashboard, and then we will respond to them. Just as a quick thing, if you can hear me, just making sure that sound is working for everybody, using the webinar dashboard, raise your hand. With the raise your hand function. Let me just make sure that we have good sound. Okay, great. Perfect. Seeing all those hands. Cheryl, the floor is yours.
Well, I thank you, Paula. I appreciate the introduction, and I appreciate you agreeing to have me for this intro session as well as partnering on sessions in the future. I'm going to give everyone a brief introduction or background on myself. I'm a agricultural and cannabis attorney. I am barred in the state of Florida. I consult all around the world, mostly in the United States and the Caribbean. I have an England trip planned coming up in the future. And how I came into the cannabis space it wasn't intentional. I had, passed the bar. I started practicing and doing estate planning and probate and real estate, areas that I had supported as a law clerk. and I just didn't feel fulfilled, and I felt like I was just running in circles. And it was a spiritual thing, and I feel like God told me, you know what, look into cannabis law, research it. And I spent a weekend researching it, and went to my senior partner and said, you know, I want to add another area of law to what I'm currently doing. I also did contracts. And he's like, all right, come talk to me. And I spoke to him, and he said, put a packet together. I put a packet together the same day. And, you know, once he didn't say no, I just ran 120% in that direction. And, you know, it's been a great experience for me. I am currently general counsel for an organization called Minorities for Medical Marijuana. They're about to have their 2-year anniversary next month. And basically, they focus on issues in the cannabis area that affect people of color, women, people with disabilities, and veterans. In addition to that, they seek opportunities. So it's not all about problem solving, but it's about creating opportunities and making sure that there is a diverse presence in the cannabis space. I'm also in-house counsel for Green Roads World, really Green Roads of Florida LLC. They're one of the largest CBD companies in the country. They're on the Forbes list, one of the top 7 hemp-derived CBD companies. Started as a mom and pop startup, 2 people, a pharmacist and a visionary, and it's grown to about 100 employees right now, which is unusual in the cannabis space. I am also in-house counsel for the EOP Foundation. We have a Medical Cannabinoid Research and Policy Institute. That's a recent development. I work with a colleague of mine in Washington, D.C. on trying to develop programs for universities to have research, statutorial research on hemp as well as marijuana, and we try to get them funding, and then we project manage getting it started and handing off to the university. Most of these projects are aspirationally going to be FDA facilities, similar to what we have at Ole Miss. And I'm also a Cannapreneur. I have a couple cannabis businesses, and finally, I'm a host of Cannabis Life Radio. So I just wanted to, let you know my background and the different areas of the industry that I touch, and that there's huge potential for anyone who wants to get involved in this industry. Basically, I went to my first event after my revelation, and then the next event I was speaking, and I've been speaking at events ever since. So it's there aren't high barriers to entering the cannabis law space. So there really aren't a lot of people of color. I'd love for some of you to join me. So this is basically the agenda. The next 2 slides are going to talk about a high level what we're going to cover. 420, happy 420 to everyone. So what's the significance? There are a few theories and stories, so I just thought that would be fun to include. What's in the name, cannabis versus marijuana? That's like one of the first things you need to learn before you enter this space. Why was it illegal in the first place? I hate to read to you, but stages of legalization, federal question, that's the big thing. Is it federally legal? Well, it's a gray area. It always has been. It probably will be until we see some of these bills coming through Congress go through. Vertical versus horizontal integration, another key understanding that you have to have before getting into this industry. The importance of decriminalization is especially important for communities of color. And then, what about the brown people? What are our issues? How are we engaged? Next, we'll talk about medical benefits, some of the chronic conditions that are affected, and patient access is at the center of all legalization efforts. So you can't see the dollar signs and forget the patient. Hemp versus marijuana, the uses of industrial hemp, the booming CBD industry. As I mentioned, I represent one of the CBD companies. Ancillary businesses, which are like businesses that support the cannabis industry, and areas of law I think that'll be most interesting to those of you on the phone, fellow attorneys, and organizations, so you can leave this conversation and then start making moves to get involved. So 420. So there are a few theories. Peter Tosh, he has that song Legalize It, which is the anthem of, the legalization movement. It was released on 420. I can't recall what year. I should look that up. But that's one of the reasons why people do celebrate. I know his daughter, Nyambe Tosh, or Nyambe McIntosh, and she had a post she asked us to all share on Facebook saying, Happy Peter Tosh Day. So it's very personal for her because Peter Tosh was her father. And those of you who don't know, Peter Tosh was a whaler. He was affiliated with Bob Marley. And also there's a history of gross prejudice, discrimination, and abuse of Rastafarians in Jamaica and around the world. There were, there's one called Black Friday, a specific day where there were, and the anniversary just passed actually within the past month, where the direction was bring all Rastas, dead or alive, and people were slaughtered and jailed just because of their Rastafarian faith and use of marijuana as a plant. And a lot of people say it's because, at 4:20 p.m., people are lighting up. Either they're finishing work or they're students who finish class, and they all kind of come together around 4:20 to celebrate that and to enjoy, indulge, etc. But more important, it really has come to be the cannabis holiday, a day for supporters of the plant to come together, to celebrate, to partake together, and also promote legalization efforts. There's a lot of great events happening across the country. I think the national, at NAN, the NAN organization has something in New York, or I think it starts like 3:30 or something like that. So there are a lot of events today. Please Google for your particular cities or your areas and find out what's going on. So let's get into the meat of the matter. The next slide is, cannabis versus marijuana. So once you become part of the industry, you'll find that there are people who just abhor, they hate the word marijuana. And the reason for that is, it has racist roots. So during the times of prohibition, when they started, because keep in mind that marijuana was legal. There were, like, Bayer had a cannabis tincture that was available to treat headaches and all sorts of things. There was a Hemp for Victory campaign, which had women and children, when we were at war, growing hemp and creating hemp products for the military. In the times of George Washington, it was required by law that you grow hemp. So, it's tragic that we had to go through, 70, plus years of not having access to the plant and the loss of all that, those potential years of research on how it could help people with their ailments. But really, marijuana just was used to identify the plant with the Spanish immigrants that had come to America, a lot of Mexican workers and things like that. So they would promote it as marijuana to invoke racism and have people think that it's the worst thing on the planet. So they would call it like the devil's vegetation, or things like that. So it's evil. There was a movie called Reefer Madness, which you'll hear referenced, and I suggest you Google it. There was actually recently a Reefer Madness viewing here in Florida, and it basically was propaganda and showed people jumping off buildings because they smoked, playing a piano in a crazy fashion where they look insane. They said that smoking marijuana would make white women want to sleep with black men and Hispanic men. So that was the type of propaganda that was used to make marijuana illegal. And of course, the robber barons, we'll call them, grouped in hemp with marijuana in that respect. But cannabis is more inclusive because very specific to the Controlled Substance Act and later on the Farm Bill of 2014, how hemp, specifically industrial hemp, is defined excludes it from the terminology of marijuana, but it's still considered cannabis and from cannabis sativa. So cannabis is more inclusive because when you say cannabis, you can be talking about hemp-derived products, as well as marijuana-derived products. And they are similar plants, so you can call them cousins, but they're not the same plants. And hemp, doesn't have the psychoactive qualities, but we're going to speak a little bit more about that later. And on the next slide, I kind of touched upon this, but why wasn't it illegal in the first place? I told you about, the requirement of growing hemp. Chinese culture has grown hemp for centuries and centuries and centuries. The same as in Indian culture, East Indian, they grew hemp. So it's always been, rope for all the wars we've heard about in history, and the rope for the ships and everything. All those things were made out of hemp until plastic emerged. And the inventors of plastic, DuPont, they promoted that hemp be looped in and placed with marijuana, and also, again, promoted the narrative around reefer madness to make it illegal. So that's a little bit of the history as far as, why is it illegal? But there was a point when it was legal, and there was actually marijuana taxes. There were stamp taxes related to marijuana. So you can see a sample of a tax stamp. I've seen an actual one. There's a testing lab here, friends of mine, and one of the owners has actually purchased and framed a marijuana tax just to show that, it was legal at a certain point, and then we went left, but there's no reason for it to be illegal at this and restricted at this time. So moving on to the next slide, it's really important to understand the stages of legalization. They're very distinct, and when you look at a particular state that you want to work in, I'm assuming New York for most of you have to really consider where are we in the legalization journey. So New York is a legal medical state. New Jersey just became a recreational state. So, the most restrictive is like strict non-legal, like maybe in Alabama, middle of the country. If you look at the map, you see it's typically the middle of the country in the South where you'll see, non-legal activity. And then non-legal with decriminalization is that first step when you kind of take a look back and reflect and say, we have these citizens who are being arrested unnecessarily, and then there'll be a movement towards at least let's decriminalize, at least let's say you can have up to an ounce on you, or you can have 2 joints, you won't get arrested for that. But if it looks like you're intending to distribute, then there may be an arrest related to that. So there'll be a non-legal state where there's not a legal process for purchasing or selling of marijuana or cannabis, but they won't penalize you for being in possession of it. And then the next step is the medical marijuana state. So that's where they say, all right, we're going to identify, we're going to starve the cartels basically, and we're going to identify safe environments for patients, and we'll tell you what a patient is to purchase marijuana and cannabis. And that's when you start seeing a call for license issue, which in another session we'll go more deeper into licensing and license applications. It's very complicated. You think, oh, okay, they posted a license, and you're like, oh, I can fill this out for my client. But typically it's about 6 boxes of information that's submitted. And sometimes they do have page limits. Some states are starting to do that, but it's very complicated. But a medical state requires specific chronic conditions to be eligible, and it's unfortunately that's typically determined by legislators, where those of us who are activists and advocates and lobbyists, there are lobbyists on both sides of this issue. So I lobby on the legalization aspect, but for us, we believe in preserving the doctor-client relationship. So we're saying, if a doctor says that you need marijuana, who is it for a government person or a legislator to say you don't qualify because your spasms aren't due to MS, your spasms are due to a traumatic head injury, but that's not listed on the chronic conditions. So those are the things that we advocate for, and lobbyists on our side advocate for. And then finally, you have a full recreational state. I'm in California today, so California is a full recreational state where you still go into that safe environment for sales. There was a licensing process. Dispensaries are set up, but you don't have to have a chronic condition. So you can basically show your ID, walk into the space, and then you choose your product. Now, recreational states or recreational dispensaries usually are medical as well as recreational. So a medical patient would have to have a chronic condition and a card, and they would have access typically to more products, not more variety, but more higher quantities of products than someone who comes in recreationally and says, I'm just going to show you my ID. I don't have to give you detail around my chronic condition, et cetera, and so on. Okay, so then moving on to the federal question. So that's the big question. We've been on a emotional roller coaster this administration as far as legalization and threats to legalization. I referenced the Controlled Substance Act, which basically identifies marijuana as a Schedule 1, even hemp as a Schedule 1 with some exceptions for industrial hemp made from stalks and stems, unsterilized seeds, things like that. So, that's really why when you at the highest of high levels, is it federally a controlled substance? Yes, it is. Is it Schedule 1? Yes, it absolutely is. It's unfortunate that we're looking at marijuana the same as a heroin, and that, again, the opioid epidemic that we have right now from prescription drugs are from drugs that are not considered Schedule 1. The deaths that we're seeing are from drugs that are not Schedule 1 drugs. So as far as the federal question, it is a Schedule 1. And when I take on new clients, because my clients typically approach like, I want to get into the cannabis industry. That's my classic client. And then I charge them for consultation or whatever. I have to disclose to them that, and even on my retainer agreement, it'll say that I'm not asserting that this is legal under federal law or state law, just as to protect myself. So, but with that said, under the Obama administration, we had the Cole memo, which, basically created a structure for states to determine their status as far as legalization. And the Cole memo requires a highly regulated market for those states to do such. So the states have a responsibility to organize and regulate and protect public safety under the Cole memo. And that's the authority which has started the avalanche of legalization across the country. Now, I'm sure you all heard about the Sessions memo that came out earlier this year. It had some drastic effects. I'm going to say the media called it rescinding the Cole memo, which it really didn't do that. It just was a little bit more strict and allowed the attorney generals for the states to determine whether they enforce. Whereas the Cole memo was more flexible and didn't encourage enforcement. The Sessions memo, the main change, so again, it's not a complete rescinding of the Sessions memo is not a complete rescinding of the Cole memo. It just highlighted that attorney generals have the right to determine how enforcement works in their particular state. So, but as a result of this memo, everybody was freaking out. There were banks that were handling marijuana business, cannabis business across this country that just instantly closed accounts. So can you imagine that you're a dispensary that's doing, millions of dollars in volumes a month, and you because in the beginning of the industry, you couldn't even have an account. So there are some state-chartered banks and other banks that, credit unions and such, that would allow marijuana business. Many of those closed. One of those closed accounts. And we had that issue in Florida where literally like testing lab clients would be like, they told me to come get all of our money right now. I'm going to go to the bank with my gun and just pick up money and put it in a vault somewhere until I figure this out. So that's the vulnerability of this industry that we're in, especially when it comes to banking laws and the whims of a headline or of Jeff Sessions. So Trump prior to his election was pro marijuana, and Sessions made his statements about his erroneous statements about marijuana being worse than heroin and things like that. And then Trump alluded to standing behind those statements, but recently, last week, he said that he doesn't want to enforce or disrupt what's happening. So it's an ebb and flow. It changes, but you just have to assure your clients not to do anything drastic until they start seeing, enforcement issues happening. This is how progress happens. I always kind of compare it to, same-sex marriage or interracial marriage. At one point that was illegal, and it took people saying, I'm just going to love who I love. I'm just going to, like, our activists are like, no, this heals me. I'm not going to die because the law says that I can't have this. And those are the people who are, changing history right now. There are some organizations like Patients Out of Time that they've been at this since, the 80s. I know activists who've been advocating since the 60s, and those are the people that the whole industry, all the money that's being made now, they're kind of standing on their shoulders. So, you hear some discussions about, descheduling, rescheduling. As an activist, pro-legalization activist, I should say, we are completely in favor of descheduling. And rescheduling would be detrimental to the industry that as we know it. It'll be detrimental to small business that involvement in the industry. If it's rescheduled so that it's only permitted in pharmacies, then the pharmaceutical companies, when that's the direction they'd like to see it go in, and then all of these people who have been given opportunities across the country to get involved, that opportunity will be eliminated. And sometimes people refer to, well, Obama had a chance to reschedule before. Why didn't he take advantage of that opportunity? And I think a lot of it has to do with the small business component and the infrastructure. Like the state of Colorado's infrastructure relies on the marijuana industry. The state of California's infrastructure relies on the marijuana industry, as well as Oregon, because the tax revenues are so significant. Las Vegas went legal July of 2017, and then in 6 months they got $300 million in revenue for the state in 6 months. So when you look at those numbers and how they're utilizing the money, Colorado has basically, they've eliminated their homelessness issue. It's going to education. Their roads have all been rebuilt. It's a beautiful city now, like Denver, Colorado. So, that's a huge contribution, and that's why that descheduling versus rescheduling question is so important. It may seem like, from a patient perspective, we're just completely concerned about patients. Doesn't matter, just give them access. So if they have to go to a pharmacy, fine, but when you look at how the impacts of the infrastructure of these states and the small business opportunity and the minority opportunity, rescheduling to like a Schedule 3 where it goes to the pharmacies would be detrimental. Next slide. So when I touched upon licensing, and I told you that we'll talk, at another time a little deeper on the licensing piece and what these applications look like and what they ask for. But one thing you need to understand is, what's a vertical integrated structure versus a horizontal integrated structure. So a vertical integration is they'll issue one license, but for that license, you get to grow and cultivate, you get to process and extract, you get to dispense and have your dispensaries, and then you get to transport wherever you need to, within the regulations. So this is a huge responsibility. but there's a lot of value in that particular license. And it's also costly for someone to apply for a license like that. So for a vertical license, a state where they have, and most states start off with a vertical integration. The reason why governments say they prefer vertical integration, like, we want to know who's doing business in our state. We want to trust these individuals. It gives us more visibility if we limit it to a select few. How that usually pans out is a select few that are, intimately involved with legislators. A lot of times the first round of licenses, nobody knows about it but a few people who are related to the politicians or know the politicians. It's not unheard of for the first wave of legislation to be written on golf courses at dinner tables between legislators and their friends, saying, if you put this and this requirement in there, I'm the only one who's going to qualify. That'll increase my chances when the application comes out. And then the regulations, the law is written based on a particular company or a particular farmer's capacities. Just to give you an example, the state of Florida, the first round of licenses, they issued 5 vertical licenses. So in the application, it required that in order to apply for one of these licenses, you have to be a 30-year nurseryman. So you need to have a nursery in place, have had a nursery for 30 years. You can't just be a farmer. You have to have a nursery, and you've had to have had one for 30 years. So that eliminates a good portion of, the society. It makes it more restrictive for farmers of color to even get involved, to apply for a license, to participate. And as expected, those first 5 licenses, there was no reflection of diversity. There was not one person of color who was issued, and a lot of them were discouraged from applying because they hadn't been around for 30 years. So then this next round, that's been changed by law. It's not 30 years anymore. It's 5 years, registered with the Secretary of State. But that's how things evolve. But I just wanted to use that example as a demonstration of, vertical. It may seem on its face that saying, okay, you just give a license to this person who has the money to do everything, and it'll flow through, and we can watch it and make sure that it complies. However, it eliminates a lot of opportunity for other people. Whereas a horizontal integrated structure, which is what we prefer, Minorities for Medical Marijuana, we advocate for it, along with a lot of other organizations. If you want to be a cultivator, you've been a farmer or you've grown before, then you can just apply for a cultivator's license. It's not going to cost the $60,000 that a vertical license costs. It costs maybe $5,000 or maybe $20,000, but it'll be less of a cost, and it's not. There aren't as many barriers to entry for a small player to get involved if you just want to cultivate, or if you just want to process, or if you just want to be a transporter. You're like, listen, I want to have a fleet of vans, and I want to deliver from the authorized dispensaries to patients. That's my business idea. I have my business plan around it. That opportunity exists in the horizontal and integrated structures, whereas vertically, the few people who get licenses, all the money circulates through them. So I spoke about the government arguments for vertical integration, and also, the minority things to consider with horizontal. Also, from a patient perspective, horizontal is better because of variety. When it comes down to marijuana, there are certain strains that work best for certain illnesses. But when you have a vertical integration structure with few license holders, they don't vary their offerings. They whatever they have is what they have, and then they send out their quick reference guides to the doctors, and they're like, you need to recommend these things because we have these things in our inventory, and this is what we grow, as opposed to when sorry, my computer just went. I don't know what happened, but yeah. So these are the things that we have and that we grow, and it kind of doesn't give the patients the variety that they deserve. Okay, so that's vertical versus horizontal. I'm back with my computer. The importance of decriminalization. That is something we definitely need to speak about. And, marijuana legalization definitely touches upon criminal law. We had the war on drugs, and it was disastrous for a lot of communities. This is now being recognized in mainstream media, how the war on drugs affected minority communities, disparately affected minority communities. There are we're starting to see in the cannabis industry some equity programs. What the most notable is out of Oakland, California, where they actually set aside licenses for individuals and communities that were affected by the war on drugs. And they just, within the past 6 months, identified the participants in that equity program who will be given licenses. They'll be able to work with other license holders who have the funds and have all the resources and partner with them so that they can be successful. Minorities for Medical Marijuana, we had 2 of our applicants through that program who were successful in getting licenses. And I know another attorney, non-minority attorney, who worked with another individual who applied for one of those licenses. So decriminalization is, from a non-licensed perspective, but just a family's perspective, just taking people literally out of their family environment, their communities, and throwing them in jail. We had the mass incarceration of the 90s and 2000s. And we have to, as we, start getting involved and we start getting involved with the licensing piece, it's really important that we don't forget the activism piece and the decriminalization piece, because it's so important and it just affects us more. When you look at the school to prison pipeline, typically a marijuana crime is the gateway into the prison system, and a lot of our community, parents in our community and children are not aware of these diversion programs, or they just opt out of these diversion programs. So you have, your first marijuana crime, possession, small possession, whatever. You choose not to go through a diversion program. And you're like, well, when I'm an adult, it won't matter. Well, not necessarily true. If there's a crime committed as an adult, then they go back to that juvenile record. And that's where we see detrimental effects based on, these marijuana crimes. Also, a lot of students aren't even allowed to go to college, or they have to disclose on their college applications, or they can't get financial aid so they can go to college. So that's why it's really important for communities of color that we focus on, while people are trying to come up with laws for licensing and access and patient access. Don't forget the decriminalization aspects of it, because we do have collateral impacts of parents being missing in homes, abuse issues as a result of that. So we want to make sure that we keep that in mind. So what about the brown people? Our industry is not diverse. It's horribly the opposite of, well, if you have a diverse on one side of the world, where cannabis is on the complete opposite. It's getting better because of organizations like Minorities for Medical Marijuana, Indica, and things like that. But like when I first started to going to events, I'd be the one brown face. And then I would always invite others, and that's the key. We do have a challenge with our civil rights generation. On one hand, the fastest growing users of cannabis are that senior community, senior generation. But on the other side, they have so many horrible records or horrible experiences with use of the plant, people who use the plant, and consequences, that they are slow moving as far as the activism part of it. I went to a conference about drug use in America, and a lot of these very respected older generation individuals were there, and there was a gentleman who came in and spoke, and he's like, yeah, there's a pot lobby going on, and all they want to do is legalize weed and pot, and they're basically brainwashing that community to oppose legalization. So we have to be mindful of that. We also have to look at our church community and start having those conversations, introducing natural medicines in our discussions in our church environment. So, and then we have a huge issue of post-traumatic stress disorder, and specifically the African American community, specifically because of racial issues and police brutality issues. When we saw that huge, I call it a spike, even though it was always present, but spike in coverage, I guess, of police brutality issues, there was a lot of recognition that there was post-traumatic stress happening, and it is definitely recognized that marijuana can help and relieve the symptoms of post-traumatic stress for veterans as well as people who've had traumatic issues happen to them. Just on the last thing on the lobby tip is like getting our Black politicians involved. That's something I'm very passionate about. I work very closely with the Florida Black Caucus of Black legislators, I should say, and we need to make sure that they're aware and they are educated about cannabis, not all, from the patient access aspect, so they insist that where these dispensaries are placed are accessible to people in our community, but also access to the business opportunities, so we can transition from these vertically integrated markets to horizontal markets, so that people can have access so that they can encourage home grow, where people can grow their own at home as patients, so they don't have to go into the dispensary spaces. Those are options, and not everyone's going to agree with everything that I propose, but we definitely, if our legislators, our Black legislators, are not aware of what it means and the impacts, then these laws pass and we're sleeping. We're completely sleeping, and that's exactly how the 30-year requirement passed in Florida and some of the restrictive requirements that completely excluded us. And then, the Black Caucus rallied around the Florida Black Farmers and Agriculturalists when they had their lawsuit to be included and be issued a license, which it's been a long journey since then. And you probably read some of the headlines and things like that recently. A new law was passed where there is a set aside for Pigford litigants. So Pigford is a huge USDA case, and that's used as the qualifier for if there is going to be a set aside for Black farmers. Usually they say you would have to be a qualified Pigford litigant because it was a discrimination case against the USDA and the federal government. So it still requires you to be a Pigford litigant, but it no longer requires you to be a member of the Black Farmers and Agriculturalists Association of Florida. So that's just one example of how, politicians need to be aware of all the ways that you can navigate and you can make sure that our community is not left behind. The next slide. So medical benefits, the patient access, this whole industry is centered around patients. And when we're speaking and we're like, we need access, it's around patients, and we use the patients for that. We're also starting to see an increase in veterans being used as the reason why. One thing you should know is that all mammals have an endocannabinoid system. The endocannabinoid system our receptors mirror the cannabinoids in the cannabis plant. We used to get cannabinoids through our food source because hemp was grown, our livestock would graze on hemp, and things like that. When the laws changed and we went into a prohibition status, we stopped getting those nutrients fed, and then we started seeing an increase in a lot of ailments, increase in autism, Alzheimer's, and a number of cancer and a number of ailments. And we believe that it's because we're actually deficient as far as cannabinoids. The chronic conditions typically will be cancer, ALS, epilepsy for sure, some states autism and Alzheimer's. So each state will have a list of enumerated illnesses. Sometimes they'll include pain, sometimes they won't. Sometimes they'll include spasms specific to MS. Sometimes they'll say if it's similar to spasms endured with MS, then it's permitted. So understand in your particular state what the chronic conditions are which qualify a patient for medical marijuana. Also, hospice care, we're seeing an increase in use of medical marijuana for that, because people want to have, as their loved ones are passing, they want to have experiences with them still. And we're finding that patients who are in hospice care and they're giving medical marijuana, they're still with their families. They're still having conversations. Whereas with morphine, they're no longer there. They're just, when they're awake and they're in pain, and then they're given morphine, and then they're not there anymore. So we're seeing that increase. It's important to recognize that the physicians are the gateway to the cannabis industry. They need to be educated. There are a lot of physicians who are still so married to the pharmaceutical industry that they are not recommending, or they won't even consider it as an option. But we believe that it should be one of the first options, not a final option that's given to patients. We're also seeing a lot of research being done. The Albert Einstein Institute is doing a research as far as opioid addiction, and the cannabis is now being seen as an exit drug, not a gateway drug. And in fact, there was an article recently that said, alcohol truly is the gateway drug to other drugs. Cannabis is not. Cannabis is actually helpful in treating addiction, and you're going to see more and more emphasis on cannabis, whether it's CBD or medical marijuana being used to wean people off their opioid addictions and other addictions. Next slide. So hemp versus marijuana. So, you've heard me talk about hemp and CBD. From a medicinal standpoint, when you think about CBD, just think non-psychoactive effects. So it does not make you high. CBD does not make you high, whereas medical marijuana, there is a high typically associated with it. Of course, tolerance levels vary from one person to the next, but with hemp-derived CBD and in marijuana-derived CBD, you're not going to have the psychoactive effects. So the definition of industrial hemp, according to Section 7606 of the Farm Bill, is turns on a couple things. So one is the sourcing of the hemp, again, stalks and stems, and also on the amount of THC. So typically when you're talking about hemp, industrial hemp, and CBD that can be used for medicinal purposes without any high, it'll be 0.3% or less. So that's the guide, 0.3% or less. Now, states can also enact their own hemp laws, their own CBD laws, and some states have gone lower than that 0.3%, but the typical standard is 0.3%. What we're seeing now, and the company I represent, Green Road, is we have 0%, not even trace THC in the product, which gives our clients assurances that they won't fail a drug test. We have law enforcement taking it. We have active military taking our product because it does have 0%, not even trace THC, which means they won't fail a drug test, nor will they be high. Transporting hemp versus, so as far as there's a lot of CBD companies. I think when our company started, there was probably about 3 or 4 players. Now there are like hundreds and hundreds of CBD products, and as an attorney, it's really important to understand that not all CBD is the same. Some CBD products have higher THC rates that are legally permitted, and they're on shelves until they get rated and those products get seized. There are also some CBD products where they are putting synthetic marijuana in it, which is extremely, extremely dangerous. So when you're approached or approaching a CBD company to represent them, it's really important that you ask for their analytics, their test results, get comfortable reading those test results, recommend that they post their test results because it's really critical that they don't have, solvents, pesticides, synthetics in their product because it's being used for human consumption. And, one bad product, one dead kid can really tank the whole industry. So, we have a responsibility there. So transporting hemp, you cannot transport hemp, the plant, across state lines. it's just not permitted. If it's legal in a particular state, it needs to be contained within that particular state. From an agricultural standpoint, you'll typically find that hemp is considered to be an invasive species, meaning that it might overtake other plants. So when you start to see hemp legalization in a state, they'll refer to it as a potentially invasive species and have very strict containment guidelines. And that's where an attorney can really come in and do great work and help write good regulations or help a company make sure that they're completely in compliance with the state regulations with regards to hemp. And now, we're starting to see more and more licenses being issued to farmers for them to grow hemp. They typically start with university programs, and then the university picks farmers or companies that they'll work with, but then it ultimately transitions to a commercialized state where there's a license process. Farmers can apply, and then they can grow hemp and bargain for deals with companies as they see fit. New York, I know I know a license holder in New York, so they are issuing or have recently issued hemp licenses to farmers. And the farmer that I know did participate in a grow program through a university, I believe it was Cornell. But that's usually how that process starts. But as far as transportation, you can't transport hemp as a plant. However, finished goods, finished products can be transported. So when you see a CBD oil, which is a end product, natural derivative of hemp, that can be sent. And you'll see, CBD companies shipping to all 50 states or shipping across the country. And that's the reason why they're allowed to do that. Finished products are permitted. And as I mentioned, the Farm Bill requires that if you are going to do grow hemp or sell industrial hemp, it has to be through a program with the university or a Department of Agriculture. Next slide. So the uses of industrial hemp. Hemp has over 50,000 uses. Some of the uses include building materials. You may have heard of hempcrete. Hempcrete is like building blocks made from hemp as well as lye, and they are very sustainable materials. They are they're flame retardant, so they don't encourage flames. They don't burn, and they're also mold resistant. So you're going to see more and more sustainable homes being built out of hemp, and buildings and places of business as well. Textiles, there's hemp cloth that's being used and like whatever room you're in right now, if you look around that room, every single thing in that room can be made out of hemp. Plastics can be made out of hemp. Everything that you're looking at can be made out of hemp, and that's why it was such a threat to the plastics industry and was looped in with marijuana and made illegal. When it comes to textiles, you're going to see the majority of that activity happening in China. What typically happens is a company will go to China and they will identify how many hectares of hemp that they'd like grown, and the Chinese farmers will grow specifically that amount of hectares for that specific client, and then they'll harvest it. And they're textile experts. So if you try to get into the hemp textile industry here in the States and try to compete with China, you're going to go out of business for the most part. They pretty much have that market cornered. And again, the Asian community has a long history of expertise in textiles. Medicine, we talked about CBD. So CBD, again, is cannabidiol, and it is used as medicine. It treats a number of issues similar to marijuana: epilepsy, Parkinson's, cancer. There's some amazing results. Our company, Green Roads, we actually work with the Joe DiMaggio's Children's Hospital here, and we have, young patients who their tumors are shrinking and they're going into remission with just a CBD regimen. So that's really rewarding. And then food, hemp greens, they're microgreens as well. And Whole Foods actually carries baby hemp leaf as a salad. So we're going to see more and more of that happening as we legalize. Next slide. So we touched on about CBD. The most common format you'll see CBD is in the form of oils. They range in concentration from, you'll see 100 milligram oils up to I know Green Roads, we cap off at 1750, but I have seen 2,000 milligram oil tinctures, 3,000 milligram oil tinctures. So, the higher the concentration, the faster it works, the more effective it works. I would Google videos on epilepsy and CBD where literally people are having a seizure and they get CBD oil dropped in their mouth and they stop seizing. Also with Parkinson's, the shaking where they can't make an audible sentence and then they get CBD oil and they're speaking like a normal person. And that's real. That's validated. So there's tons of videos on that I would suggest you watch. And CBD can be very expensive. It's because of the processing that's necessary to get it to the state where it can be sold. So just be mindful of that when, people are like, well, it doesn't make you high. Why is it more? That's because of the healing properties of CBD and the extensive processing that takes place. CBD law varies from one state to the next state, but from a national perspective, as mentioned, the authorization is given through the 2014 Farm Bill, Section 7606. There are limited seizures and arrests happening across the country. I'm going to Nebraska to deal with an arrest that happened there. And again, I'm a non-litigator, but it's more understanding support, providing the local attorney with some background on cannabis. I just got an email about something happening in Wisconsin, a seizure in Wisconsin. So, it is happening, but it's pretty seasonal. Every year you'll have a few. And then, like example, a few months ago, Tennessee had stores were closed down, chained, and people were arrested. And then, by the time it went to court, the judge said, open those stores back. It's legal at a federal level. And all of the charges were dismissed. But the unfortunate part is that people have to go through that to have the right to do what's already legal. And there's a very interesting case that's happening in the Ninth Circuit out in San Francisco. And I was able, February 15th, I went to the hearing. We're waiting for the opinion from the judges, the panel of judges, and it's called Hemp Industries versus USDEA. You can Google that or search on YouTube, and you can actually watch the arguments. It's very interesting, and the DEA attorney actually basically said it's legal. If someone gets arrested or challenged, all they have to do is challenge that. So but from the judge's perspective, again, they haven't written their opinion yet. It's why do they have to go through that instead of you clarifying your guidance on the DEA website. So those are the things. Again,
yeah. Sorry, I wanted to just have you call attention to the time. We have scheduled 3 minutes, but you can go on and finish your deck. But I wanted to remind everyone who's on the call that if you have questions and you want to start submitting them now, you should do that. All right, continue on.
Yeah, sorry, I can't. I'm long-winded because I'm super passionate. I just love the fact that you guys have all joined with interest in this area because we need help. As mentioned, I'm not a litigator, so there is a need for a lot of litigators to get involved and fight these fights. It is a business and industry in its infancy. There's plenty of opportunity for everyone, and there are a lot of challenges that we're going to have to overcome. So ancillary businesses, when they talk about the gold rush, they say, people who made the most money were the ones who sold picks and shovels. And it's the same with cannabis. Like the marketing companies, all the different companies that are being started that support the label companies, the people with the child-proofing containers, all of those people are making tons of money. I have a couple of cannabis businesses I put there. Green Sustainable Strong is cannabis and agriculture, so that supports the farming industry. And then Canna Headhunters is my staffing agency specific for the cannabis industry. So they're both startups, gaining momentum. But, if you have an idea or a client comes to you and they're like, I want to get involved with cannabis, and then you pull the information, you look at the licensing cost, and you're like, you don't have this money. I'm sorry to give you that. And you encourage them to say, look at what they're currently doing and how that can support the industry. So it's definitely a huge opportunity for small business and a huge opportunity for attorneys. And then next slide. So this is probably one of the most important parts, the areas of law touched by cannabis law, everything basically. So you got the government and lobbying, interfacing with, government officials, health law, writing disclosures for disclosures and informed consent forms for physicians, educating physicians so they stay within the guidelines. Criminal law, we spoke about. Real estate law, huge for real estate law. Patent, trademark, copyright, IP, it's getting bigger and bigger as we speak. Even in the Caribbean, they're looking for IP attorneys, patent attorneys to help them with intellectual property, with their vintage strains and things happening there. So there's a patent from that UCAN just got August of last year on suspensions, cannabis in suspensions, that it is very interesting. They haven't enforced yet, but we're kind of watching to see what that means for the industry. So tons of interesting areas of law. Next slide are a few more. I know administrative law, family law is huge. So we're starting to see cases where, especially parental custody issues, where one parent's like, well, this person used marijuana, and then the person will say, well, I'm a patient, I legally use marijuana. How does that impact the custody and the family law environment? Employment law, again, it's state by state, and so far it's been held that private companies have the right to do whatever they want when it comes to employment, so they can fire people even if they are legal patients. Agricultural law is huge. That's an area I practice in, and I educate Black farmers. I spoke at the Professional Agricultural Workers Conference at Tuskegee University. I was at Black Farmers Conference at Tuskegee, and there was a Small Bucks Conference in Atlanta. Really just trying to inform and educate farmers about this opportunity. If you want to diversify your crops, this is a great place to go. You just need to, have the right legal guidance and figure out where you fit in. And land use law, the zoning piece, is huge. There are tons of billable hours when it comes to land use and cannabis. So, if those are any of the areas you practice, or if I haven't listed it, it probably does affect the cannabis industry. And I mentioned, some great organizations to get involved in. Minorities for Medical Marijuana, of course, is close to my heart to them. Their general counsel and their founders, a good friend, Roz McCarthy. They have a national footprint, and growing. I think they have 16 state chapters at this point. Roz is, she's in Sacramento. There's cannabis events all over this country, and members of Minorities for Medical Marijuana and officers are representing at all of them. So it's great to get involved in. It's a good source of information. NORML's been around for like 50 years, or closer to 40 years, as far as advocating. Patients Out of Time was one of the first, and it's a nurse-driven organization for education. Indica is a new one that's come up. Cannabis Cultural Association is based out of New York. And Jake Plowden has a podcast that he does, and he's everywhere. So encourage you to get involved with them. Women Grow, a national footprint organization, and the Minority Cannabis Business Association is another. So those are organizations that you can just join, become part of their membership. It doesn't have to be costly. Like Minorities for Medical Marijuana is like $100, to join and for the year, and you're on the members calls and things like that. Beyond that, there's some podcasts. I'm definitely going to plug my show, Cannabis Life Radio, on the next slide. I'm a co-host. We have 3 seasons of footage. You can go to www.cliferadio.com and watch any of the old issues. But In the Know 420 is a good one with Jake Plowden and Joe Bondi. Joe Bondi is an attorney out of New York City. I've been to his office, and I was on his show first week of probably March. So those are ways you can kind of educate yourself even more beyond this call. Whom Did You Know is Carrie Accardi, a good friend. She puts out small, shorts with information about cannabis. MJ Biz is probably the biggest cannabis conference, the Vegas one. It's happening in November. And the whole industry is there basically, and you can't do the whole exhibit floor. It's mad. Women Grow has great conferences, and then Cannabis World Congress and Business Expo is one that's really right there in your neighborhood. It's May 31st to June 2nd. It's at the Jacob Javits Center. I went last year. I am covering it this year for Cannabis Life Radio, and I'll be very involved. So I encourage you to participate in that. So that's, pretty much what I wanted to cover with you guys today. There's some, predictions as far as what's going to happen with the industry. We see Big Pharma, GW Pharmaceuticals submitted to the FDA their application for their CBD medicine Epidiolex. That submission kind of changes everything as far as how the FDA looks at legality of CBD, and the FDA will come back with their decision on whether they'll license it in June of this year. So the whole industry is anticipating that. So we're going to see big pharma involvement. We're going to see an increase in minority, more diversity involvement. So that's really what I'm anticipating to happen in the industry coming up. So any questions for me?
I don't have any questions submitted yet, but this is the time, if you have any, to submit your questions. And I'll just give it a hold. In the meantime, all Cheryl's information is on the screen currently for you to contact her if you have additional questions or ideas, or like to get involved with some of the advocacy in this space. And since I'm not seeing any questions come through, Cheryl, I think you did a good job covering the rooter to the tutor of all of this, and I learned a lot myself.
Thank you.
So happy that you could take the time out on today for Happy 420 Day to do that, and we look forward to doing some more of these with you. And for all of you, yeah, all of the people online, we're going to have this up on YouTube shortly, so that you can circulate this content today when it gets a lot of traction. And again, thank you.
Well, I thank all of you, and if you want to be involved, I have my contact information there for future questions. I believe in holding the door open for others. So, let's get more diversity. Let's get some more brown people involved so that we can protect the interests of our community. And this is a great format, a great platform for me, and I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Wonderful. Bye, everyone.
Bye.